At 2 a.m., I walked into the garage. My girlfriend was on top of him in my car. She looked at me and smirked. Closed the door. My name is Daniel Price, and until that night, I thought my life was predictable in the way most people secretly hope for. I had a stable job as a mechanical engineer, a house I bought with my own money, and a fiancée I believed was devoted to me. Her name was Natalie Brooks, and for 3 years we had built a life together that felt like it was heading toward something permanent. We had our routines. She cooked on weekdays, I did it on weekends. She liked watching reality shows, I watched old crime dramas, and we joked about how our tastes made no sense together. We had a wedding date penciled in for the following spring. The night it all started wasn't supposed to be unusual. It was a Saturday, and I had spent most of the day helping a coworker move furniture into his new apartment. By the time I got home, I was sore and exhausted. Natalie said she had a headache and went to bed early, which wasn't strange because she'd been under stress at work. I remember kissing her forehead and telling her to rest while I stayed up to tinker with a project in my home office. Around midnight, I finally crawled into bed beside her. She was asleep, breathing evenly, her hair covering half her face. But at 2 a.m., I woke up. Not from a dream, not from thirst, but from a faint sound that didn't belong. It was a muffled thud followed by a metallic clink. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen in the kitchen. Then I realized it was coming from below us. From the garage. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the wind rattling something loose, but the noise was too distinct. My garage door had always creaked when it moved, and I could swear I heard it just a few minutes earlier, though I hadn't been fully conscious. A chill ran down my spine, and I quietly slipped out of bed. Natalie didn't stir. I didn't want to wake her until I knew what it was. I grabbed the flashlight I kept on the nightstand, more out of habit than fear, and crept downstairs. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I paused at the door leading into the garage, pressing my ear against the wood. At first, nothing. Then, another sound. A quick, breathy laugh. Too high-pitched to be a man. My stomach tightened. I turned the knob slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and pushed the door open just enough to peer through the crack. What I saw in that sliver of space hit me harder than a punch to the face. The overhead light was on in the garage, casting pale yellow across my tools, shelves, and car. And in the driver's seat of that car was a stranger, bare chest, messy hair, leaning back against the headrest. On top of him, straddling his lap, was Natalie. She wasn't crying or caught off guard. She wasn't horrified at being seen. She was laughing. Her hands pressed against his shoulders, her dress bunched around her thighs, and her head tilted back like this was the most natural thing in the world. I must have pushed the door wider without realizing it, because both their heads turned. The man looked startled, but Natalie didn't flinch. She met my eyes, smirked in a way I'd never seen on her face before, and said 2 words that burned into my mind. Close the door. No apology. No fear. No explanation. Just that command, dripping with arrogance. For a few seconds, I froze. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe this wasn't real. Then anger surged like fire in my chest. But instead of slamming the door or yelling, I stepped into the garage. My bare feet touched the cold concrete, grounding me in reality. Who the hell are you? I demanded. The stranger didn't look guilty. He looked amused. Name's Sean, he said casually, like we were meeting at a bar. Guess you didn't know. Natalie slid off him, smoothing her dress down as though I'd interrupted them during a dinner party, not in the middle of what they were doing. Daniel, just go back inside, she said, almost bored. We'll talk later. I stared at her. We'll talk later? You're in my car at 2 in the morning with some guy I've never seen in my life, and that's all you have to say? Sean chuckled, stretching his arms. She didn't tell you? We've been seeing each other for a while. Honestly thought you were just the roommate by now. Every muscle in my body screamed to grab him and throw him out of my house, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the smug calm in Natalie's face. Maybe it was the arrogance in Sean's voice. Or maybe it was the detail I almost missed. He had my spare car key dangling from his fingers. That key had been in a small drawer by the kitchen door for years. Hardly anyone knew it was there. If Sean had it, that meant Natalie had given it to him. And if she'd given it to him, then this wasn't a drunken one-time mistake. This was planned. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. Rage wouldn't help me now. Get out of my car, I said evenly, locking eyes with Sean. He smirked. Or what? You gonna call the cops and tell them your fiancé invited me? Natalie crossed her arms, still standing by the car. Daniel, stop making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. That sentence, more than anything, sliced through me. I was the one being humiliated in my own home, yet she framed me as the fool. Sean finally slid out of the driver's seat, slowly, deliberately, like he was daring me to throw the first punch. I didn't move. I just watched him, memorizing every detail, his tattoos, the smirk, the way he slung his jacket over his shoulder. "See you around, buddy," he said with a wink before walking out the side door. Natalie didn't follow him right away. She lingered, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Pity? Contempt? Whatever it wasn't love. When the door clicked shut behind him, the silence was unbearable. Natalie finally broke it with a sigh. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but my brain had gone into a strange, detached state. Everything around me, the tools on the wall, the smell of oil and metal, the car, felt suddenly alien. "How long?" I asked, my voice low. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Months. Months." My throat went dry. "In my house." "In our house," she corrected sharply. That correction told me everything I needed to know. She didn't feel guilty. She felt entitled. I turned and walked back into the house without another word. She called after me, but I ignored it. Once in the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking. Every rational part of me said to storm back out, to throw her out, to make her confess everything. But another part whispered that I had already lost the battle if I reacted blindly. That smirk on her face, the way Sean held my key like it was his, they weren't afraid of me. They thought they had already won. And in that moment, I made a decision. If Natalie wanted to play this game, then I wouldn't just be the betrayed fiancé. I would be the one watching, listening, waiting. Because something told me this was more than infidelity. That key meant planning, and planning meant danger. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the wall while Natalie stayed in the bedroom, not even bothering to come out. The house felt colder than ever before. At sunrise, when she finally appeared, she acted like nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, scrolled through her phone, and asked if I wanted breakfast. The casualness was more unsettling than any shouting match could have been. It was as though she expected me to ignore what I had seen, to pretend it hadn't happened. But I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unhear her voice saying, "Close the door." And I knew then that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after the garage scene felt like stepping into an alternate version of my own life. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee in hand, watching Natalie scroll through her phone. She looked calm, collected, even faintly amused, as if nothing unusual had happened. Not a word about what I had seen. Not a single reference to the man who had been in my car hours earlier. The silence was suffocating, but it told me more than any confession ever could. She didn't think she had to explain. She thought I would fold, accept whatever story she might eventually craft, or worse, pretend it never happened. I couldn't shake the image of Sean twirling my spare key like it was his trophy. If he had that, then she had given it to him. If she had given him that, then this wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was planned. That thought lodged in my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. At work, I went through the motions, but I wasn't really there. Every blueprint, every calculation blurred in front of me. By the time I got home, I had already decided that I wasn't going to confront her again. Not yet. I didn't want lies, and I didn't want half-truths. I wanted proof. Real evidence of what I was dealing with. Because a woman who could smirk in my face while sitting on another man in my own garage wasn't just playing games. She was hiding something deeper. That evening, while she showered, I sat at my desk and opened our joint bank account. I expected to find the usual routine expenses, groceries, utilities, maybe a random online purchase. Instead, I noticed a string of withdrawals that made my stomach twist. Every Friday for the past 3 months, she had taken out cash from the same ATM across town. The amounts varied, but never exceeded $400. She never used cash for anything at home, which meant she was pocketing it for reasons she had no intention of explaining to me. I clicked through to her credit card statement. The pattern only got worse. Gas station charges in neighborhoods she rarely visited, restaurant bills high enough to feed 2 people, and, most damning of all, several charges at a budget motel off the interstate. The name was so ordinary it almost blended in with the rest of the list, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I shut the laptop and sat back in my chair. It was one thing to see her with Sean in the garage, but reading it on paper, watching the financial pattern unfold in black and white, made it real in a different way. This wasn't an impulse. It was organized, regular, deliberate. The next day, I drove past that motel. It looked exactly as I had imagined. Cheap neon sign buzzing faintly, paint flaking off the doors, cars parked unevenly outside. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear for a few hours. I sat across the street with the engine off, telling myself I was ridiculous, that I'd wasted gas just to confirm what I already knew. Then, at exactly 6:15, Natalie's blue sedan turned into the lot. She parked in front of room number 7, got out, and walked straight inside. No hesitation, no looking over her shoulder. She knew exactly where she was going. 10 minutes later, Sean arrived. He didn't even glance around. He walked straight into the same room, and I had to grip the steering wheel to stop myself from jumping out of the car. They stayed inside for nearly 2 hours. When they came out, she was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing against his as they kissed by his car. She looked radiant, like she hadn't in months, like the glow she saved for him was something she deliberately withheld from me. She drove home later, walked into the kitchen, and told me about her long day. She said it with a faint yawn, poured herself a glass of water, and went upstairs to change. I stared at her back and realized she didn't even bother covering her tracks. She wasn't worried about getting caught. That was when I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who knew how to gather evidence, someone who could help me pull the curtain back. Through a college acquaintance, I was given the name of a private investigator, Clara Jensen. Clara was sharp, calm, and efficient. I met her in her office 2 days later, laid out everything I knew, and waited for her to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Affairs are messy. But if she's giving him keys and letting him use your property, this is bigger than infidelity. This looks like preparation for a setup." The word setup made my chest tighten. I had been focused on the emotional betrayal, but Clara shifted the frame. Sean wasn't just some guy. He could be a parasite. If Natalie had invited him in, maybe she wasn't just cheating. Maybe she was complicit. Clara moved fast. She installed hidden cameras in the garage and living room, a tracker in my car, and began pulling Sean's background. She told me not to tip my hand, not to confront them too early, and as much as I wanted to explode, I knew she was right. 3 days later, she called me. "Your fiancé's boyfriend has priors," she said flatly. I pulled over on the shoulder of the highway to listen. Sean had been arrested twice in the past 10 years, once for check fraud, once for attempted identity theft. Neither case had landed him serious prison time, but both left a trail of complaints from landlords and acquaintances who accused him of skipping rent, draining money, and vanishing without a trace. Clara's words echoed in my ears long after the call ended. He's not just a cheater. He's a predator. That night, I watched the garage camera feed and saw something that made me feel colder than the night of the discovery. Natalie and Sean were standing near my workbench, whispering. The audio was faint, but one sentence came through clearly. "He won't suspect anything. Once he agrees to sell, we'll be free." Sell. The word stuck out like a flashing light. What did she want me to sell? The house? My car? Both? Then Sean's voice followed, smooth and confident. "You handle him. I'll take care of the rest." The way they spoke was chilling. It wasn't the dialogue of lovers hiding an affair. It was the cold planning of two people running a job. I shut the feed and sat in silence for a long time. The betrayal was one thing, but now there was another layer. This wasn't just emotional. This was strategic. She was positioning me as the obstacle in their way, the man they needed to move aside. When Natalie came downstairs later that evening and sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through her phone, she acted like nothing was wrong. I studied her face, her posture, the casualness of her movements. Did she ever love me? Or had I been a mark from the beginning? Every little detail, her sudden push for us to refinance the house, her insistence that I take out certain insurances, suddenly looked different in hindsight. I wanted to ask her outright, to grab her phone and throw her lies in her face. But Clara's advice stayed with me. Don't tip your hand until you know the whole picture. So I nodded, smiled faintly when she told me some half-hearted joke, kissed her cheek when she got up to go to bed. She walked away humming softly, not realizing that every step she took was pulling her deeper into a trap I was now setting for her. For the first time since that night in the garage, I wasn't just angry. I was focused. She thought I was weak, blind, easy to manipulate. Sean thought he could treat me like a joke. But they didn't know that I now had eyes everywhere. They didn't know I had a professional digging through their secrets. They didn't know that the man they dismissed as harmless was already plotting his counterattack. And as I sat there in the quiet living room, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't just catch them in the act. I would expose everything, piece by piece, until they destroyed themselves with their own arrogance. When you live with someone long enough, you learn their rhythms. The way they put their keys down when they walk through the door, the way they hum while they cook, the way their voice lifts when they're lying. I started paying attention to everything. Natalie still tried to maintain the illusion of normal life, but the cracks showed once I knew where to look. Every time she smiled at her phone, every time she left the house with that excuse about working late, I knew exactly where she was headed and who she was meeting. Clara's equipment made sure of that. The small tracker she'd tucked into my car was feeding me locations that didn't match Natalie's stories. The hidden cameras recorded more than I could bear to watch sometimes. And every piece of evidence was piling up into a case that could shatter everything she thought she controlled. The most chilling clip came a week after Clara first set things up. Natalie and Sean were back in the garage, standing right next to my car, the same place I had caught them that night. This time, they weren't careless laughter and arrogance. They were serious, voices lowered, Sean leaning close as if he was giving instructions. "He'll go along with it," Sean whispered, his hand resting on the hood of the car. "He's not the type to fight. Just push him. He'll fold." Natalie laughed softly. "He doesn't even notice half of what I do. If I tell him we should sell and downsize, he'll say yes. He trusts me. Always has." That laughter hit me like a blade. Not because it was loud, but because it was so confident. She had decided who I was without ever asking me. In her eyes, I was a man too blind and too soft to question her. That miscalculation became the fuel I needed. The next day, Clara and I met again at her office. I played her the clip, watched her lips press into a thin line, and saw the flicker of something like anger in her eyes. She wasn't the type to get emotional, but even she seemed disgusted. "This isn't just an affair," she said. "This is conspiracy. If she's discussing selling property, if she's setting up to move assets, this is financial exploitation. You could take this to court." I told her I wasn't ready for that yet. I wanted more. I wanted to see the whole picture, to know exactly how far they were planning to go before I moved. Clara didn't argue. She just told me to stay calm and keep collecting. It wasn't easy. Living with Natalie during that period felt like sleeping beside a stranger who wore her face. She still smiled at me in the mornings, still asked if I wanted toast or coffee, still kissed me goodbye on her way out the door. But those small gestures had turned into performances, cheap stagecraft meant to distract me. I kept my responses neutral, polite, detached. If she noticed a change, she didn't comment. Or maybe she assumed I was too dense to suspect anything. I started making my own quiet preparations. I pulled our joint money out of easy access accounts and opened one in my name only. I met with a lawyer under the pretense of updating my will, but really I was setting up to protect myself in case she tried to bleed me dry. I even installed a backup set of locks on my workshop in the basement where I kept sensitive documents. If she was willing to hand Sean my garage key, I wasn't going to risk her doing the same with everything else. One night, I came home earlier than usual. Her car was already in the driveway, but the house was quiet. I walked inside, calling her name, and followed the faint sound of voices to the garage. I stopped just short of the door, heart pounding as I realized she was on the phone with Sean. She hadn't even bothered to step outside. "He's still clueless," she whispered, her tone smooth and steady. "Don't worry, I'll bring it up next week. The housing market is strong. I'll tell him it's the perfect time to sell." A pause, then a small laugh. "Of course I'll make it sound like it's his idea. He never argues when I frame it the right way." I backed away before she finished, careful not to make a sound. Later, she acted as if nothing had happened, curling up beside me on the couch as if she hadn't just plotted my future without me. I looked at her face and felt something colder than anger. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was contempt. Clara's digging into Sean's background kept turning up more ugliness. He had left a trail of chaos wherever he went. Unpaid debts, women who described him as manipulative, even a business partner who accused him of stealing equipment. Nothing had ever stuck long enough for real consequences, but his pattern was undeniable. And now he was in my garage, in my house, using my fiancée as a partner in his games. The idea of them together still burned, but the thought of losing everything I'd worked for to two con artists was worse. That's when Clara and I began to set the trap in earnest. We placed a hidden recorder in Natalie's purse one evening while she was in the shower. We knew she often met Sean at the motel, and we needed to hear exactly what she said when she thought I wasn't listening. The first recording almost made me sick. She complained to him about how slow I was to act, how dull I seemed, how she couldn't wait until the house was sold so she could finally feel free. He asked if she was sure I would go through with it, and she replied, "He's too predictable. He thinks I love him too much to hurt him. He'll never see it coming." She said it with a certainty that made my skin crawl. It was one thing to cheat. It was another to take joy in the idea of dismantling the man you claimed to love. I didn't say a word to her about it. Instead, I doubled down. I told her work was overwhelming, that I might need to spend late nights at the office. That gave me space to coordinate with Clara, to meet with my lawyer again, to quietly remove her access from as many of my accounts as possible. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care yet. The tension in the house grew thicker by the day. I started sleeping lighter, every creak of the floorboards waking me. Some nights, I heard her moving around, whispering into her phone in the kitchen or garage. She must have thought I was too deep asleep to notice. I kept my eyes closed, breathing steady, all the while listening, memorizing. 2 weeks into the surveillance, we got the breakthrough Clara had been waiting for. Sean and Natalie met in my garage again, and this time, they spelled it out. Sean told her he had found a buyer lined up, someone who'd take the house quickly for cash. All I needed to do was sign the papers. Natalie assured him that I would. that she knew exactly how to frame it. Then Sean said something that made my blood freeze. Once the money clears, we're gone. He can pick up the pieces on his own. That was it. They weren't just dreaming about a future together. They were planning to erase me from mine. When I watched that footage, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt clarity. I couldn't wait any longer. If I let this play out, I could lose everything. It was time to turn the tables. I started small. I agreed with her more often, acted distracted when she hinted at selling the house, pretended to be tired whenever she suggested changes to our finances. I gave her the illusion of control so she would press harder. The more confident she became, the sloppier she got. And the sloppier she got, the stronger my case became. Clara told me to be patient just a little longer. She wanted one more solid recording, one more undeniable piece of evidence before I confronted them. I agreed, though it took everything in me not to explode each night when I lay next to her, listening to her steady breathing, knowing she was planning to ruin me. The final push came one Thursday evening. Natalie sat beside me at dinner, her voice sweet, her hand brushing mine as she said, "You know, maybe we should think about moving. The market's so good right now, we could get a great price on the house." I looked her in the eyes and asked, calm as ever, "And where would we go?" She smiled, that same rehearsed smile she always gave, and replied, "Somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to manage. Just us, fresh start." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she hadn't already made the decision without me. I nodded, played along, and told her we could talk about it more over the weekend. She squeezed my hand, thinking she had won, but I knew better. The trap was almost ready to spring. The weekend came faster than I expected. Natalie had been pressing harder with each passing day, and by Saturday night, I could see it written across her face. She thought I was ready to fold. Over dinner, she leaned forward, speaking in that calm, manipulative voice I had heard so many times in the recordings. "Daniel, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time for us to take the next step. We could sell the house, downsize a little, put some money away for the wedding." She smiled like it was the most reasonable idea in the world. I nodded slowly, stirring my food as if I were considering it. Inside, though, I was done pretending. I told her we should revisit the conversation on Sunday, when I'd be clearer-headed. She agreed, her eyes lighting up as if she had already won. But Sunday wasn't for her. Sunday was for me. That morning, I met Clara at her office to finalize everything. We had the recordings, the footage, the financial documents, and even witness statements Clara had managed to collect from Sean's past acquaintances. There was no more waiting. I was ready. By evening, I set the table in our dining room. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a simple meal. Natalie came downstairs wearing a dress, as if she were celebrating in advance. She kissed my cheek, poured herself wine, and sat opposite me, her eyes bright with anticipation. Halfway through the meal, she leaned in, her voice soft and coaxing. "So, have you thought more about selling? We could really use the fresh start." I set my fork down and looked at her. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I reached into the drawer beside me, pulled out a folder, and placed it on the table. Her smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," I said. She hesitated, then slid the papers out. Photos spilled across the table, grainy stills from the garage camera, shots of her with Sean at the motel, transcriptions of their conversations. She flipped through them quickly, her face draining of color. When she reached the page detailing Sean's criminal record, her hands began to tremble. This isn't real." I finished for her. "It's all real, Natalie. Every lie, every meeting, every time you thought I was blind, I was watching." Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. Then she tried a different tactic. "Daniel, I can explain." "No," I cut her off. "You can't. Because I've heard it all. I've watched you plan to bleed me dry, to sell this house, and walk away with him. I know who Sean is, what he's done, what he's tried with others before me. You thought you could make me the fool, but the truth is, you miscalculated." Her face twisted from shock to anger in seconds. "You went through my things? You spied on me." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "You were on top of him in my car. In my house. You think I needed to spy? You handed me everything I needed." She shoved the papers away, her breathing sharp and fast. "You don't understand. Sean loves me. He promised me." "He promised you what? That you'd get to live off someone else's money again? That he'd protect you? Natalie, he's using you just like you used me. You're not his partner. You're his mark. And when he's done, he'll disappear the same way he's disappeared from everyone else's life." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the doorbell rang. She froze, staring at me. "Who is that?" she whispered. I stood and walked to the door, my heart steady. When I opened it, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. Behind them, Sean was handcuffed, his smug face replaced with irritation. Clara had delivered everything we'd gathered straight to the authorities, and they had moved faster than I expected. One of the officers explained that Sean was being taken in for outstanding fraud charges and that the new evidence tied him to attempted schemes involving my property. I thanked them, stepped aside, and let Natalie watch as her lover was escorted into the back of a patrol car. She turned to me, eyes wide with disbelief. You did this?" "No," I said evenly. "You did this. You brought him into my life. You handed him the keys. You laughed while planning to destroy me. All I did was refuse to let you finish." She sank into a chair, her face pale. For once, there was no smirk, no arrogance, just emptiness. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quickly. Clara helped me file the necessary reports to protect my finances, and my lawyer moved to separate Natalie's name from anything connected to me. She tried calling at first, leaving frantic voicemails about how she could explain how she didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't answer. Then came the anger. Texts filled with insults, accusations, even threats that she would tell people I had been abusive. But she underestimated the weight of the evidence. When I forwarded the recordings and documents to her own family, to our mutual friends, to anyone who might believe her lies, she lost the power to spin the story. They saw her for what she was. Within a week, she had moved out of the house. By the end of the month, she was living back with her parents, unemployed after word of her involvement with Sean reached her workplace. People who once respected her kept their distance. The bright, polished image she'd built crumbled overnight. As for Sean, he was still in custody awaiting trial. Clara told me he'd likely face significant time this time around, given his history and the strength of the evidence. It wasn't just my case. Other complaints were resurfacing too, and it seemed the walls had finally closed in on him. I stayed in the house, not because it was easy, but because it was mine. Every creak of the floorboards, every tool in the garage reminded me of how close I had come to losing everything. For a while, I thought I'd feel only bitterness in these walls, but slowly, the anger gave way to something else. Relief. Not because I had caught them, but because I hadn't let them win. Some nights, I thought back to that moment at 2 in the morning when I opened the garage door and saw her on top of him in my car. I remembered the smirk, the arrogance, the way she told me to close the door. For weeks, those words haunted me. But now, they had a different meaning. She had asked me to shut myself out, to ignore the truth, to let her run the show. I hadn't. I'd opened the door wider. I'd stepped through, and I'd seen everything she wanted me blind to. The finality of it settled in one evening when I received an envelope from my lawyer. Inside was the signed agreement confirming that Natalie had no claim to my property, my finances, or my future. I set it on the table, poured myself a drink, and for the first time in months, allowed myself to breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. She had tried to erase me from my own life. Instead, she had erased herself from mine. And the one thing I knew for certain was that I would never again underestimate the quiet power of paying attention, of watching, of waiting for the right moment to act. Because in the end, that was what saved me. Not rage, not confrontation, but patience. Natalie had looked at me and seen weakness. Sean had looked at me and seen a fool. But they had both been wrong. And they learned the hard way what it meant to smirk in the face of the wrong man at 2 in the morning.